As I press the play button. Ready? Are you ready to rock and roll?
All the time, man.
All right. What's up, everybody? My name's Indy, and the gentleman right next to me, that's Jay, and this is Indie Game Business. Today we've got Brandon Pham, and he is the game dev Unchained. Wow, that's just like, you need some intro music for that. I'm telling you, man.
Yeah.
Do we get to talk trash about your partner because he's not here with us today?
Go for it, man. I do it all the time.
Today we're going to talk all about Larry.
Yeah. Well, nice to meet everybody. Yeah. Nice to meet everyone. Thanks for having me on, man.
Hey, dude, it's reciprocal. So Brandon and Larry were kind enough to have me on their show several months ago, and it's awesome because I get people and they're like, "Hey, found the show," and I'm like, "How did you find us?" And they're like, "Through Game Dev Unchained." I'm like,
"Oh, nice, perfect,
awesome, perfect." But I wanted to have you on not only just to reciprocate, but also because you've got a really cool, interesting story. So you and Larry, and I'll let y'all go into the details on this, but you come from AAA, and now you're going indie. So. Talk about so one, we always want to know, how did you first get into the industry, and walk us through your career up to this point?
My beginnings are I went to college that offered a game art and design degree, and when I finished that, I went to 2K, and It was a process, of course. Obviously, when you're trying to get your first foot in the door in the industry, it takes a while. And so mine came in through just emailing a bunch of companies that I had no idea what games they were working on. And one of them, well, a few of them replied, but the one that replied that I eventually got a job with was 2K. And at the time, they weren't announcing what game they were working on. It turned out to be BioShock 2, and this is like fresh off the release of BioShock, so it was like Game of the Year. It had all these notoriety. Originally, it was at 2K Boston, so I had no connections that it would be in California, which is the job I took. And went through the interview process, talked to them. Originally, when I applied, it was for like a senior role, so I was fresh from college. So I had no authority whatsoever to apply for that role, but I just, was mass emailing for jobs, and they just liked one of my piece and went through the whole process. At first, I came in on some contract, but after a month, I became full-time, and that started my career. I worked on BioShock 2. I stayed there for about 3.5 years, went on to work on XCOM. And then from there, I went back to Los Angeles, worked with a few people at Spark Unlimited for jobs, and they just Lost Planet 3, the whole process. After that, I worked at Digital Domain, which is a visual effects company, on game cinematics. Brought all the way back to Sledgehammer Games, which worked on Call of Duty, Advanced Warfare, and World War II. And it was a pretty fun ride.
Just a couple of little known games, right? That's it. Games nobody heard of. Yeah,
I really like it when I prefer to have people on here who have made games that people might have played, somewhere along the lines.
No, it's cool. It's a definitely cool process. So I was lucky enough to start off my career with a game that people were looking forward to. I know a lot of my colleagues, when we graduated, didn't have that opportunity, so it took a while to talk to people and what game do you work on? You're saying some random thing, and they're like, what is it? What is it about? And you have to go through and basically prove yourself that you're a game developer, that working on a game that I never heard of. But I've always had my career where it was nice to kind of talk to people. I worked at Call of Duty, and every mom and kid knows Call of Duty, so it was a fun experience to at least not to have to explain myself. What the game is about. And it's also really cool too to be able to go to people's houses and see the game that you worked on is on their shelf. So that has always been a fun experience when it comes to AAA. Just working on games that is known and going through that experience with really high caliber people, and having the fortunate time to actually spend time with those guys. but the upside is still the same. You know, obviously, after Sledgehammer, I worked at mobile companies and lesser known studios, and after Sledgehammer, it was a choice on my behalf to kind of see what the other side of the industry is about. Because as you can imagine, when you work at big games, at big companies, there's certain aspects to it that isn't as great. You know, there's a lot of political side of it, and your job becomes more specialized. You're expected to do one thing really well all the time. And when you're a creative person and where you're always trying to explore other things and you're trying to expand yourself, it's very hard to be kind of working inside that little corner.
So. It is, because you do get into a very, 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 very specialized role when you get to a big company of any kind. But right. I mean, I will say this: if you think it's difficult explaining, what you do to people who may or may not have heard of you, because you actually worked on a game, try explaining what you do when people say, "What have you worked on?" and you're an agent / biz dev consultant, and it's like, one, not a lot that you've ever heard of, but two, you're never going to find my name in the credits anywhere. I mean, occasionally I get a special thanks to, in there somewhere, but it's not like, a lot of these new sites, and they're like, well, prove the games that you've worked on. I'm like, yeah, good luck, man. Go back 20 years. Okay. There's a lot of stuff that's, been there, done that. Right. So, you and Brandon come from very much the AAA background and that very specialized set of skills and that sort of stuff. But now you're doing indie dev, but you're also doing, something that's near and dear to our hearts, in that you are educating, developers on the realities of the industry and what to expect, and giving kind of an insider look through your podcast as well now.
Right. So, shortly after me kind of pivoting my career to like smaller studios, because, I was in a place where like I've done big games. I've done that most of my life. I want to see what mobile gaming is about. I want to see what indie gaming is about. But my main goal was to create my own game eventually, have my own business, and actually have self-reliance, right? And being the be-all or end-all. I was looking forward to that. So my co-host, my partner, Larry, and I got together because we worked since college. We met in college, and we started business together. And it wasn't like a leap of faith moment. Like, it was a transitional period of us, coming home from work, an 8-hour job or something, in some cases 10 hours or more, and doing this side business thing, our side hustle, to kind of figure this out, because we figured even if we want to make a game, which is our ultimate goal, if we have no mountains to shout and make noise about it, there's no point, right? The greatest game of all time doesn't matter if no one plays it. And so that kind of was how we breeded into the podcast, which is talking about experiences that we've had in the game industry. And a lot of our conversations come from within the studio. Like, there's always people complaining or whining or gossiping, and we're like, this would be actually good podcast material. And so it started from there. But like, at the very beginning, we have to provide a solution. We can't be just bitching and moaning for an hour, right? So
you can totally bitch and moan for more than an hour, really.
We definitely can't do that. But we figured that to be productive, to kind of help people out of this mess, is like, let's bring on professionals who are doing the things that we want to do, and kind of just help other listeners get to that point, right? At the same time, being self-servicing and being able to learn from these professionals and paving a path for ourselves to kind of have an audience, right? So we started Game Dev Unchained, which is the podcast that's still ongoing. We're talking to professionals. And we started Gamesco Online, which is our other passion. Gamesco Online is like our educational front of providing basically free education. Because not only have you been screwed within the game industry, we've been screwed with the educational, because it was only 2 years ago, right, that I finally paid off my student loans. And that's coming from a guy who had a steady, good, job for the last 10, 12 years, right? So that kind of paints you a picture of like all these professionals who went to a traditional college teaching game art and design and coming out of it and it taking that long to kind of pay it off steadily. Of course, people can pay it aggressively at the beginning, but like if I were to pay like the minimum or a little bit more once a month, that's how long it takes. So I'm out of that mess, but like the school is that kind of motivation where like, hey, these are materials that are great for anyone to learn. We actually have like an international class of students who are enrolled in our school, and it's been very helpful because these students, we would see students that come in super excited, but life just happens, and they would take a break, and then they would come back. It's completely free, so that there's no penalty, and they would come out and come back stronger with like great work. Right, and they just, and that is kind of like the prerequisite for people in the industry. You just got to be able to keep at it to succeed. And so those are our two passions: talking about the industry, helping professionals within the industry to get better, but also, you know, introducing students who are interested in game development to go in with a low barrier and be able to succeed without having accruing debt, right? So those are two main goals where our business kind of surround around. And up to this point, you know, I'm 3 months into going full time with the business stuff. So I finally unchained myself officially 3 months ago, and it's been a ride, man. It's been fun. Like I'm closer to where I've always wanted to be, which is just with my family, working from home, and just kind of charting my own path. But it took a while. It took a while for anybody who's out there listening. It is a challenge, and a lot of it has to do with commitment and time.
Can you tell us what the link is for the school?
Yeah, just go to gameschoolonline.com, and you can just type it in Google too as well if you can't find it. But that's the link to our school if you want to start your education in game development.
So how many classes do you teach on business, Brandon?
None. I'm still an amateur at business. I have no authority.
So, but this is, and so you all have so much stuff going on, and we have so much stuff going on. For those of you listening, this may be the most stream of conscious, ADD enabled interview ever. So the Game School Online, that's what we're partnering with you on in November, right? Or is that different than GDUX?
No, so GDUX is a convention for Game Dev Unchained. So GDUX, to kind of break the mystery, what GDUX stands for, right? So it's Game Dev Unchained Expo. That's what it stands for. And so that's part of Blue Champs. So Game Dev Unchained, along with other shows, is under our Blue Champs umbrella. And so what we're teaming up in November is to
I'm drawing a diagram. Don't worry about me.
So Game Dev Unchained is a podcast that we come out with every Tuesday. We talk to professionals and talk about their experience and how to improve ourselves as game developers. And we created this online convention like a few months ago. It was our first one that we had over 20 speakers from all corners of the industry come together and talk about timeless topics within the game industry to help game developers. We had Game Workers Unite to kind of kick it off. They're like a huge push behind unionizing game developers. They're a huge vocal for all game developers out there right now. And we had many other people and many speakers talking about their experience. And so we're running another one in November. We're partnering up with Indie Game Business to kind of promote. And the idea is still the same. It's like just the best way to think about it is like TED Talks for game developers. And that's exactly what we're trying to aim to do. And it's a free online event for 3 days. Anybody can tune in, watch, and conversate with our speakers. But it's our way to kind of like figure out what's going on and provide solutions, because every 6 months there's something going on with the game industry, it feels like, that is like pivotal. And I'm kind of like super proud of where we are coming from and where we're heading as an industry, but there's so much there's so much of a mess that we're leaving behind when it comes to developers, where they're kind of like the last man on the totem pole on a lot of situations that we're trying to fix. So that's something that we feel GDUX can help rectify by just putting speakers and people who can solve problems front and center and talk about the issues openly.
So, all right. So, what is the difference then between GDUX and the Game School Online?
So, Game School Online is just strictly about techniques and education, right? So, if you want to start making a game, right? You need 3D, you need animation, you need visual effects. So, it's more practical, it's more technical, it's more hands-on knowledge. So, GDUX is more about like just the business side, the lifestyle thereof, of game developers. Because now that you know how to make a game, is that all there is to it? No, you gotta learn the political side. You gotta learn about surviving with your skill set. We wish it would be more straightforward like that. Hey, you have the ability to do something, you will succeed, and eventually there's a chartered path for you to become a millionaire. But that's not the case. There's just a lot of talking involved. And a lot of like it's like Survivor, man. There's a whole different side that school has not prepped us, that we had to learn on the go. And it's like, oh, so that guy's a backstabber, and that person you gotta stay away from, and that person can't keep a secret. So man, there was so many lessons aside from working at AAA that I had to go through to kind of piece it together and just be safe. And it was. I'm only like 10 to 12 years in, right? Like I was at the 5-year mark when I looked at that, and I was like, "There's no way I can do this until I'm 60, dude. There's just no way." And it was 5 years in, and that's the thing that people tell us during school when we talk to professionals and we have them kind of come in as guest speakers. They like around the 5-year mark is the burnout rate for most game developers, and we're sitting there. It's like, what are you talking about? This is the funnest industry in the world. You're just you're washed up. What are you doing here, telling us all this tall tales about the game industry being bad? And it was exactly that, man. Around 5 years, where I felt like, holy crap, there's so much to this industry that's a mess right now. And I would like to say, it has gotten better, but I felt like it's gotten worse. Opportunities have increased for sure, because the mobile industry opened up, indie development opened up, streaming opened up. There's a lot of like VR, AR stuff. There's a lot of cool things that our industry continues to innovate. But when it comes to the foundation of just treating game developers better, it's gotten worse. And we're in a bigger mess than before, I felt like.
So, I mean, and that's what we hear. I mean, I usually say if you make it 3 years, you've done well, but at 5-year burnout, I mean, that seems about right. So, when you're looking at all the office politics that you have to navigate when you're at one of these bigger studios, where is it worse? Is it worse at some of the big AAAs or the mediums or like the really small indies? I mean, where's the greatest pain point you're seeing?
Well, when it gets political, that it involves people and money, right? That's the two top points that you're always wrestling with. So from my own experience, so I worked at mobile companies, I worked at smaller studios, and I've also worked at, obviously, AAA studios. And that was me trying to investigate on my behalf to kind of like, what's going on here? So I have some experience at least to kind of talk about points. To me, there's something inherent about AAA where people just suddenly turn. And I've seen this. I've been at a place where they would handle multiple projects. And one being a AAA project and one being a very small kind of like VR indie project, right? All with under one house. And I was actually had the opportunity to work on both teams. And just by going upstairs or going downstairs, where downstairs physically it was the smaller team was downstairs and the AAA team was in the upstairs office. Just by going downstairs on some days, there was a whole tonal shift in attitude and everything. And I don't know what exactly it is. I'm sure there's a science to it where when there's like real money involved, people start just backstab and they just get their knife sharpened and ready to go. Like, it's just something along those lines where people feel like, hey, I got to make sure I get mine. And it's crazy, man. It wasn't until later when in my career when I physically witnessed what was going on just by a floor distance, right? That people just have a different attitude, and a lot of that I feel like is ingrained with people who've gone through like bigger studios where they see how it's done with how people climb up the ladder, and they just kind of either consciously or subconsciously replicate that because they feel like that's the key to success, right? And so to me, it feels like AAA studios have more of that attitude. Of course, I'm not saying like the mobile studios I worked at or the smaller studios don't have that. There's always that. But I feel like with smaller teams, there's lesser of that because people have to pull their weight in a smaller team, and it shows, right? You can't just be a talker and be able to hide in the shadows, where at bigger studios, it's a lot easier to kind of hide, right? You can clock in, clock out, and because there's like 1,000 people at their desk, nobody can really micromanage you that much. So you can at least do shit, cause damage, and be able to like push the blame on people. But with a smaller team, it's like, it's harder because it's like, did you do that thing I told you last week? No. You know why I know? Because a big part of the game isn't done. And that's on your responsibility. Right? With the bigger studio, you can push blame because you have meetings within meetings, and you have, dude, this is the crazy thing. So I made it all the way up to lead, right, in my career before I went full time at several studios. And even when I got there, where I felt like, oh, once you get in the inner circle, then I should be able to know what. No, man, there's like a secret door behind that door too, where there's like other meetings happening. I was like, why am I not in that meeting? I'm a lead. It's like, what are you guys talking about? But that's always the case. There's just like a closer circle that you're always away from, and you're never really in control. Even if you're doing your best work, right? You're never in control because unless you're the owner of the company, or even if you have some stocks, if you're not the decision maker at these table meetings that they have, you're never going to be in control of your life, right? Like, my career is always going to be in someone else's hands. And that's just what I've realized, at least in my own personal experiences. Like, I'm never going to be in control. And am I comfortable with that? Some people are. That's fine. I mean, I know friends that are super happy at where they're at, who actually like that lack of control, where they can just go in for work and leave. But I've been laid off before, so I've gone through an experience where even if I do my best work, it doesn't matter because the bottom line always wins. Where I just don't fit within that Excel sheet for that milestone or whatever, and I just get laid off, right? That just happens.
I would venture to say that I bet the owners feel that way too. There's a bunch of shit happening behind closed doors that I know nothing about.
Of course.
I'll guarantee you, as you and Larry get further on in this company, you're going to realize that just because your name's on the building doesn't really mean you know what's going on.
Yes.
Why does nobody tell me anything? Well, all these decisions were made.
I try to get out of decision making all the time, and I'm like, I just work here, and my team's like, it's literally named after you, and I'm like, so?
No, there's definitely a lot of there's a lot of comfort into knowing that you're not in total control of everything, right? Because that's a lot of weight on your shoulders, a lot of stress for sure, which is, what I'm going for. Every move that I decide on behalf of my company is a move that can either be detrimental or beneficial. But I like that. Like, there's something within me that like loves the fact that I have 100% control, even though it doesn't seem like 100%. Like you said, it might be later down the line where, like you said, it's like, hey, you're not really in control unless you're like, coming up with your own money, right? So
I like the fact that basically if something gets fucked up, it's my fault.
Yes, I think that's what the key thing is. Yes,
but not everybody is like that because I've got friends of mine, and it's funny I can't name them anymore because we're like live on Facebook, and they're gonna be like, "What?" But I've got friends of mine who I feel are far smarter than I am, and far more organized. And they've looked at me and they're like, I can't believe you do what you do. There's no way I could, just quit my job and run my own company. And that, no, absolutely not. And I'm like, to me, it's like, it's not that hard, but it is, but I'm used to it too, and so it's not a one is better, one is not, but it's just the person, it's like that scene in American Beauty when Kevin Spacey gets laid off and he pulls up to the drive-through and he's like, I want the job with the least responsibility possible. It's like, we all have that day. It's like, I want to just be the guy in the Perfect Storm movie who catches the fish coming off the boat and throws it in the ice. That's all I want to do.
Yeah. Hey, that's a lot of work. I did that. That's a freaking lot of work. And a lot of responsibility.
Sure.
I don't want to be the one on the boat. Let me get that clear. I don't want to be doing that. I want to be the guy on the dock that's catching the fish coming off the boat. I'm not going out. I saw the rest.
So you want to be the conveyor belt,
then,
basically, right?
Yeah, basically. Yeah. See, there's days I just want to be the conveyor belt.
That's true.
But there is. I mean, to me, it's one of those. And you can only take so much responsibility. It's like I'm like you, Brandon. It's like I want to know that whether we succeed or fail, that weight's on my shoulders. That's not because of somebody else on my team. That's not because of some outside influence. But the reality is, as I've seen in the last 9 years of doing consulting work, companies run out of money. And there's absolutely, we've had 2 clients in the last year that were well funded that no warning at all, just were like, yeah, we don't have any money anymore. And they vanish. And
that's happened a lot lately too. There's some big companies that like people go into work and they're like, oh, your job is done.
Yeah. And so the funny thing is it's so cyclical in our industry. So as a developer, you're reliant on a publisher to make sure your game is being sold.
Yeah.
And you're making money. But as the publisher, nowadays in the industry, you're also very reliant on the streamers and the influencers to make sure that people are, seeing your game and it's being played. Mm-hmm. The streamers and the influencers are very, reliant on the fans who, they have to have watching them, or they're not going to have, the capability of doing any of this. Mm-hmm. And the fans are, reliant on the developers to make sure that they're, putting these games out there. So we don't have a linear path from bottom to top. It's everybody has to be reliant on everybody else, or the whole thing just falls apart and it turns into a giant shit show. That's the reality of it. And so whenever I see these things and they're like, well, that game failed because blah, 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 they didn't put multiplayer in or whatever, or they completely screwed up, hosting. It's like, there's typically a lot more shit involved in this than, what you're looking at. So yeah, I mean, it's an interesting industry. That's what we always say. And if you don't love it, you're not going to stay in it because it's a giant shit show most days. So what has been the biggest change, positive and negative, that you've seen and you've experienced going from, that as stable as it is world of AAA development to, what you and Larry are doing now?
Yeah, definitely, man. And I totally understand my own experience is kind of like the flip side of what people usually, when they look at their career and looking at their trajectory, right? I went pretty much in reverse. I started at big companies and I slowly went down to like smaller and smaller companies to finally where I am right now, like basically a team of 5 people working on one game, right? The thing that I'm doing with Larry and like all the side business stuff that I'm doing, well, which is my main business now, it took years, man. If I were to talk about when I started to have interest with this, it was like it was about, I would say it was 3-4 years ago, 3-4 years when I started to really consider not leaving the industry. We're never really leaving, right? We're still really a part of it. a lot of our business around game development, but like leaving in the traditional sense of working for someone at a bigger company or whatever. And it was a lot of just figuring things out, right? We had an idea of what our business was. Even when we say, hey, we got the podcast, we got the school. These are the things that we want to do and give back to community. It was a lot of testing, like partnership, talking to people, commitment and time, hours, like after a full-time job. What can we achieve? What can't we achieve? Our goals, aligning our goals realistic with the time limit. I mean, and I think that's a necessary step for a lot of developers who are thinking of doing something else. Like a lot of the game industry right now, they don't give the time to kind of focus on that. Because I feel like with a lot of developers that we talk to, they would just go cold turkey, right? They would just quit their job and just decide to make this game that they've always wanted to make, and just figured that, hey, once it's made, we're going to sell a lot of copies and then we're set. But there's so many business part of it that nobody has really taught us, right? That we have to figure on the go, that gets completely dismissed out of the equation, and we just basically, people run out of money, or they have to go back to work, or what's worse is like they ruin the relationship that they garnished with all the developers they told to go full time with, right? So the main thing that I am facing now than I was before, that was the pros and cons of that, is that I'm actually loving the full-timeness. So I've been doing this for 3 months, right, full-time at home. And I've been fortunate enough to be okay. Like I'm not in a rush to go back to work, right? There's no like financial need for me that pushes me to like not stay on course with the goals that I've set for myself. So I'm very lucky in that. But at the same time, I took 3-4 years researching to do this in a way that makes sense. But even with that preparedness, right, going through the trials and tribulations with partners or talking to sponsors and all this, people with finances, there was a moment, right, 3 months ago that I had to like, all right, I'm never going to be safe enough to kind of do this. And it really did end up being like a leap of faith. It's like, all right, I'm going to do this full time, because there's never going to be a time where I'm going to feel super comfortable with this, because it's such a different way of thinking, right? Because for like 12, 13 years, I've been in a salary job. It's like, hey, every day you do this for 8 hours, and at the end of 2 weeks, you get paid, right? That's just the mentality that I've been ever since I entered the job market, not just the game industry. That's just how it was. And that's the illusion, I feel, where I've realized it's been illusion in the past 3 months, because there's a different way to go about it now. You can lock in a business deal and still be set for the next 3 months, not working a single day. Well, of course, you got to deliver the goods, but like it's a different way of thinking. It's like getting paid up front and then working rather than working and then get paid later, right? And that's a complete reversal that I didn't really anticipate. I hear people talking about, but now going through it, I'm less scared of it, right? And so the pro is it worked out, and the con is not that bad. Like that's the thing I've realized. It's like it isn't that crazy once you're like jumping in the water and it's just rolling with it.
So
go
ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I just want to end over this. That's just the main fear when it comes to like wanting to do this full time.
Awesome.
Where, yeah.
So pertaining to that, Ryan Manning from Discord asks a question here. If you were starting your game dev career all over again and coming into it as an indie studio, what would you do differently, and what advice would you give to startup indies?
Oh, that's easy. I wouldn't change a thing.
Everything is perfect.
Everything was perfect. Well, I will say this, right? There's a lot of talks about developers, especially students, right, who wants to go to indie development. There's a huge plethora of tools now that you can do that. You can go from college, work on your game, get a team together, and there are ways to set yourself up for success if you do the research, right? The benefit that I feel that that I got from going through what I went through is that I have such a huge network of game developers, like high quality game developers that I can call on and talk to, that I wouldn't have gotten if I just skipped that step. Like when you go to AAA studios, that's the huge benefit. You're surrounded by the best of the best, right? These guys have worked really hard to get to that position, to work on that AAA company with that game that everyone's talked about. So you're at a class of people that will carry on and do great things, right? Even after you depart. So that is an experience I feel like everybody should go through, and before kind of striking it out on their own. Like that is just priceless amount of networking that you will not get normally. Like just being able to go to war with each other, seeing how everyone deals with stress is an important element, I feel, especially if you're looking at a business partner, right? Can they still pump out high quality at the lowest point or not? And you don't want to find that out when you're going into business together and there's like money involved and like life is at stake, right? You want to kind of test that out on someone else's battlefield, not on yours, right? So I recommend everybody to still do that. Like if you can get in the industry, work at that dream company, and feel how that feels. It's gonna burn, it's gonna hurt. You're gonna feel burnout in 5 years, but like it's an experience that is necessary for you to do before you go indie, in my opinion.
So what's one of the best practices, things that you learned at Activision and 2K that you brought over to your work on indie games that most indie studios don't typically think about?
That's a good question. Just how to pump out high quality work. I mean, at least just setting the standards. I'm not saying indie developers don't have like high quality standards. Of course, there's plenty of great indie games with great quality work. But I feel like it's with at least AAA, there's a certain process that can only be done with that amount of people, right? So with that many people that is constantly being paid to do what they do, there's processes in place like production and talking to people and being able to talk to people that you don't get with the indie, right? With indie, I feel like it's about the work, and yes, you might be talking to your best friend or coworker, and you have that relationship that you can talk things through. But talking to strangers, you know, let me rephrase that. The best way I can think about it is like, you're thrown in a room full of strangers, right? And you're forced to be best friends by the end of it to kind of ship this thing together. That's a rare scenario, right? Unless you're in like into other hobbies, that scenario doesn't happen that often after we graduate from high school or college. And so you're going to this professional field with 300 other people that you have, and there's so many different personalities thrown in that mix that you have to deal with. You're getting kind of like a fast education on dealing with people, which is essentially what you get at AAA, right? Working with people, and still, if you hate his guts or her guts, still able to produce a high quality product at the end of the time, right? And that's what I feel like most indie developers won't get a taste of, just by the nature of a smaller team, right? That you don't deal as much with as many people with as many different personalities at once in such a short period of your time, right? In your life. And I felt like because of the backstabbing, the politicalness, the stress, the crunching, like I've gotten close to a lot of people through that, that I still value. I mean, we spent like last 4 years bitching and moaning about the industry, but the reality is we've made a lot of good friends, a lot of good contacts that have gone on to do great things. And I felt like that's something that smaller studios or indie studios don't really get to have as much, because you're most likely picking people that you know. not just cold calling people to work on a game together.
But that also is a factor in why we have people burning out in 2 years.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I mean, it's one of those that there's no good answer. There's no ideal world that you get put in. It's a matter of finding the team and the project that you like, because you've got those people that are like, I want to come in, do my 8-9 hours and leave. And then you've got the ones that are, I'm going to stay here all night until this gets done, which is part of the reason we also have crunch problems and that sort of thing in the industry. And I've said for a long time, the issue with crunch, especially at AAA studios, doesn't completely fall on the shoulder of the executives. There's also that mentality that we have, and like you said, it's easy to kind of like check in and check out at a big studio because not everybody is constantly being seen. But at the same time, it's really easy to, work for 36 hours, in like a 2 or 3 day period because of the very same reasons. And so until we as the developers, sit down and go, I'm not going to work 80-hour weeks, for this project. It's a matter of you have to fight that internal, I don't say stigma, but that mentality internally. At the same time, you have to also fight the executives that are like, oh, yeah, well, we need to add 4 more levels and 16 character models by Tuesday. So y'all, do that. That's it all kind of goes kind of goes both ways on that.
No, it definitely does. There was a point in my career for sure where I was wrestling with that. And it was like a light switch moment for me when I decided to do all the side stuff. Where I realized I'm not as dependent on my full-time. And once I realized that was the case, I felt like this surge of power of saying no just happened overnight. Like, can you come in and crunch? It's like, no, I'm not. I'll see you next week. And in most cases, they're fine with that. Like, okay, I understand. Like, it comes with seniority, of course, as you have more experience and you kind of see how the company goes and you have more authority to being say no or not. I mean, I feel like saying no has a problem with mostly like junior level or people new. They have a lot of things to prove. But because I get my power outwards, where I was teaching, at like colleges while I was working full time. That's the beginnings of Gamesco Online. Like I was just seeing education as a way out, possibly, right? Or just at least a side hobby thing. Where I started to feel that I had the ability to reject anything that I didn't feel was cool, right? As soon as I had that, I had a lot of fun with it. Like the office politics didn't bother me as much. It's like, oh yeah, he is an asshole. Well, that's the way he is, right? Where early in my career, I was so invested. I had like this young rebel mentality where I'm like, we can change this. Let's get some people together.
Oh,
let's rally. If we talk to the right people, they would care about this situation. They want to fix the problems, right? But man, I learned the hard way, like at the beginning of my career, where that was not the case. Friends, they're friends, right? The guy that everyone has a problem with is friends with the head. Therefore, he's untouchable. He's a made man. So whatever he does to fuck up the studio, he'll be the last one still there. And the whole studio will, his whole team will be fired before he will. And that I had to learn that the hard way. And as soon as I started getting all this side stuff and my dependency, or at least my egg basket was spread from my main job, right? I have a bunch of other things I'm working on. I didn't care as much. I was a lot happier. And I didn't have that problem of stressing and overemphasizing if I'm performing well, if I'm buddying up with my lead or not. I didn't care. It's like, this is a fair contract deal. Like, even I'm full time, I'm coming in my 8 hours, I'm doing my best work. That's the exchange. The rest of my time is the rest of my time, right? And as soon as I had that moment, it was a lot more fun. Like, I didn't care as much because every studio, if you're working in the game industry will have its issues. Just name any great studio that you think are great. They have problems. All of them have problems. And as long as there's people involved, and I don't know if it's just inherent with game developers, it's just the way we think. Like, we're just socially awkward. And so you throw us in a room with socially awkward people. They don't know how to deal with power, when they are in a position to make calls. I forgot who told me during my career, where someone pulled me aside or made me realize, at least, there's like just two forms of people, right, within the industry. There's when someone gets shit on, right, they can react two ways, right? They either come up and like fix that issue, where they're like, hey, I've been shit on, but I will never treat anybody the same. I will fix this. I will turn this around for any future company I work on. Or the second guy, which is the main response, where I'm going to shit on everybody else once I have power. And those are the guys I meet the most, right? That's the guy I meet the most, where he finally got in a position of power and he just does the same thing that everybody else has done before.
We used to call it seagulling.
Yeah.
The seagull, you come in and they shit on you and then they fly off.
Yes.
And it's like, what just happened on my body? But what you're saying about getting to that point where you have the confidence internally to say, okay, this isn't necessarily as important as I may think it is.
Right.
That's just not just developers. I mean, I went through the very same thing when I was in my early 20s, and I was working 60, 70 hours a week. And, I would completely stress about, being at shows and what was going on back at the office. And if I went on vacation, what was this deal being handled? Was that deal being handled? And it took me several years before I realized, okay, wait a second, if I'm out of the office for a week, the world is not going to implode.
Exactly.
It's okay to take a step back, and it's okay to tell people, I can't get this done this week. You're going to have to wait till next week. And we get that. I mean, even now with the consulting firm, occasionally, we'll have 2 or 3 different clients that, come to us with something all in the same week, and you have to be professional about it, and you have to be smart about it. But, you have to say, look, there's a set of priorities. If we have, 5 clients that suddenly send us games that they won't send to publishers in 1 week, you can't do that, because then the publishers are looking at you going, why are you just spamming me with projects? You have to have that ability to sort it out and triage and move forward intelligently. But it's not the end of the world if shit doesn't happen tonight. That's the part that you have to deal with, and you have to have the confidence to, like you said, at the end of your 8 hours, say, all right, I'm going home. I'll see y'all tomorrow. I've done my best work today. I didn't sit in here and screw off, all day long. Yeah. My favorite part about going to a small, and I was never in a big corporate world, but I don't think I would last in a big corporate world either. My mouth is too big, but it's the fact that you're not in meetings all day long. It's amazing how much shit you can get done when you're not in a meeting for 4 hours a day.
All right, let's field this other question because time's running low here. There's another question on Discord from Ryan Manning. What's one piece of advice you have for other indie studios, aka don't do this?
Don't start a studio in the Midwest. I mean, completely, I don't know where that came from. That was no idea. Anyway, go ahead, Brandon. I'll let you jump on that one.
The one thing about indie studios, if you're the one thing not to do, right? Man, for me, a lot of it has to do with partnering up with the right person, right? So let's say at the very least you want to partner up with one person to this indie studio. I think it really, really matters on who you're partnering up with. Because even with people, like I said, you can create this huge network of people that you worked at, like, very big companies on very respectable projects together. It's a different mentality to go into business together, right? It's like you can't expect the same output because this is something new, right? that you guys have to figure out. You're both going to business for the first time. You're figuring things out, and you're trying to see if your goals and ambitions align, right? And to me, when I talk to indie developers on our podcasts or personally, it always comes back to, are you surrounding yourself with the right people or not to help with you? And in some cases, like we had an interview a couple weeks ago where someone started out with a partner, but ended up deciding that he's better to work alone, right? And so the biggest difference was he didn't have to split the task and be disappointed, right? It's basically a marriage outside of marriage. And as an indie developer, when everybody is such a pivotal role in building the company and delivering success, I feel like going into business with someone without testing it first, like signing the contract and saying like this is going to be a happy marriage forever and forever, is the biggest mistake an indie developer can make. Like, I feel like there needs to be, like any relationship, a testing ground, and most importantly, recreate the lowest point that each of you can take. Like, what is the stress point that you guys can test out to working together and seeing how everybody does? And that could be in the prototype phase. Like, if you are working on a game, go through the prototype phase, set out a goal for yourself, and go through and make it aggressive. Make it as aggressive as you can, because it actually will be better. And use as a test case scenario of when, because it's important to see that person, your partner, in a stressful situation and see how he deals with it. Does he commit to it? Does he double down? Or does he straight up just crash and burn, start blaming you for shit, right? And I feel like that is very important when it comes to building a company together. So if I were to give any advice about going to business or starting a company or doing indie dev, to vet out your partnership and don't just sign on the dotted line and be like, we're cool, so let's do this, right? No marriage works like that, right? Just treat it like a marriage. There's a whole testing phase before that happens. And I feel like that's a lot of what indie developers do. They just like, hey, I want to make a game. You want to make a game? Yeah, I want to make a game. But when you, and that the problems are not, even if you're the ambitious one, if the other person isn't meeting you there, you're going to have problems as a business together. Like, it's just going to be a problematic situation that you're going to have to deal with over and over and over again. And it slows down your process, slows down your progress, and it really demotivates you, right? So I think that's the key thing right there.
Yeah, I talked to a team the other day, and they said when we left our studio, there were, I mean, it was, I talked to so many, it completely lost my train of thought. It was, earlier this week when we were talking, and he said when we left the big developer that we were at, there were 6 of us. And then when the conversation came up about how you're not going to get paid and everybody, is actually going to have to invest money in this to get it off the ground, 4 of those people went, no, never mind. I'm going to do, something else, because it is. And I see it so much with students first coming into the industry. It's like, hey, me and 4 friends of mine from college are going to make this game. And it's like, you've known each other for a year and you've only really worked together on like side projects that don't have the same level of stress. But that's great advice, actually, because it's one of the big things is you got to treat it like a marriage. And what 30% of those fail. Is that what's the latest stat on marriages now? But
probably more than 30%. But I've got a hard stop. I've got a hard stop in like 2 minutes. So
okay, all right. So let's run through the real quick stuff. Brandon, gdux.me is the link to the series of lectures and interactions that you all do. We're going to be following that up. So the week of, I think it's like November 4th through November 8th or 3rd through the 8th. GDUX.me is going to be taking place the first 3 days, and then our business event is going to be taking place the last 2 days. So you got like this whole 5 days of business education and then applying that knowledge. All right, so because you all got so much stuff going on, give us the highlights of where people can go to find out about all your initiatives.
And I have to end in like a minute, so.
Okay, yeah. BlueChance.com is an umbrella company that houses a lot of our shows. So that includes Game Dev Unchained, which also includes GDUX, which is what we're talking about. GameschoolOnline.com is where you can go to learn actual game development, to learn how to make games. Our main goal is to create that so that everybody can be junior ready and apply for jobs without a college education, because we don't need a degree in our industry, which is the great thing about our industry, and that's our main goal. So yeah, if you just type any of those things in Google, you'll find us, and we can direct you to the other stuff. So thank you guys so much for having me on.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. And Nightwolf, if you wanted to come in Discord and ask that question, I'm sure the conversation can be continued. What's the Discord link, Jay?
It's discord.gg/indiegamebusiness. Indy and I are there. Brandon's there. Most all of our guests that have ever been on the show are there. So
yeah, come and hang out. Also, this will be on anchor.fm/indiegamebusiness. There's a bunch of podcasts on there, so please feel free to subscribe to that and join and listen. And thank you guys so much. Thanks, Brandon.
Thanks, Brandon.
It was a lot of fun.
Bye.
Have a good one.
Bye.